Welcome to Lock and Key, the show where we unlock the keys that drive success. I'm your host, Lauren Bates. Here, we sit down with bold thinkers, trendsetters, and industry influencers to reveal the principles that open their doors: business, creativity, resilience, legacy, victory. This is where real stories meet real strategy, and nothing stays locked for long. This is Lock and Key. Back to another episode of Lock and Key, unlocking success stories in business, culture, and beyond. And today's guest is a media visionary and global strategist who has been shaping cultural narratives for decades. He served as publisher of the iconic Uptown Media Group and previously held the role of group publisher at Uptown Ventures, overseeing some of the most influential black media brands. Now he continues that legacy of excellence as president of Watkins Media Travel, a division of the Watkins Media Group, and also serves as global partnership director for Travel Curator, advising and representing leaders across the international travel community. And I have the personal honor of calling him a former boss and mentor. So please welcome to the show, Mr. Henry Watkins. Give it up, everybody. Give it up.
Thank you for that rousing introduction, Lauren. Boy, I got to tell you, you're going to have to write my epitaph. It's a thrill to be here, to be reunited with you. As you mentioned, we had the privilege of working together on a previous venture, and so I'm thrilled to be here to talk about how we go about unlocking the world through travel and media.
That there's going to be a lot of questions that we can delve into. The very first one, I've always been really interested in knowing a little bit more about your background story, Henry. So could you just give us just a sentence or two? Just give us your background and what you're all about.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm basically a kid who grew up in Queens, New York, who never envisioned that he would have a career in media. Certainly nothing in terms of examples in my neighborhood of anybody that was doing that. I didn't even know that you could make money traveling the world and meeting with tourism directors and hoteliers and actually get paid for it. But with that said, I started my career on the newspaper side at Newsday, which at the time was the dominant newspaper in Long Island, New York, and then subsequently made my way over to Times Mirror magazine. That's a story in and of itself, how that happened. And that was the foundation that led me into the media business, and then eventually working heavily in the travel sector.
Okay. Now, was there a specific incident or event or a situation that happened that made you, or that maybe the light bulb went off and said, "Hey, you know what? Travel is for me. I think I can really do something with this."
Yeah, I think back to the mid-'70s, the first time I left the country. I went to the lovely island of Jamaica in pursuit of a girl. I was seeing a girl who was Jamaican who spent her summers with her family in Jamaica. And I pleaded with my mom to let me go and spend some time with her there. And it was an eye-opening experience in many ways. I spent 6 weeks in Jamaica, living with that family, learning about the destination from an insider's perspective. And I said to myself, wow, this is fantastic. I'd love to see a lot more of the world. Little did I realize that over the course of my career, I would return to that island nation some 38, 39 times on business. And so,
Wow.
yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
Okay. That's I love that. It always starts off with the girl, right?
It always starts with a girl. But, I would tell you that the quick narrative, though, in terms of how I got into a position of working for a national publication is, I think, a fairly interesting one. As I mentioned, I was working for Newsday in Long Island, trying to break into the national magazine scene, which for anybody is difficult, but particularly at that time in the mid-'80s, difficult for people of color, as it continues to be to some degree even today. And long story short, one of my clients mentioned that he had a good friend at Times Mirror magazines who might be able to help me. To make this story somewhat shorter than it could be, he arranged an interview with this friend. Now you got to remember, this is the '80s, right? This is
Right.
before the internet taken over. This is before we had all this technology, And so I didn't really know much about the guy that I was seeing, except that he was very senior at Times Mirror magazines. Well, the late Herb Schnall, as I found out when I walked into his oak-paneled office, looking at pictures of, a lot of older white guys with gray hair,
Of course.
it turns out he was the chairman of the board for Times Mirror magazines.
Wow.
And this is the guy that I was interviewing with. And he basically said to me, we would really love to have a greater diversity here at the company. My publishers have not done a particularly good job of that. I can't force their hand, but I certainly can open a couple of doors. Now, mind you, the side story is earlier in that day, I had interviewed with Essence Magazine.
Okay.
And they had made an offer. And so now I had a decision to make, right? Do I take the position at Essence or do I pursue this conversation at Times Mirror?
Mm-hmm.
Ed Lewis and his partner, Clarence, who, God rest his soul, recently passed away.
I didn't know that.
Wonderfully brilliant men, who built one of the most iconic brands in the world. But at that point in time in my career, I decided I didn't want the additional challenge of selling quote-unquote ethnic media. And so, which is kind of an interesting point because, as we're going to discuss later in this conversation, that's exactly where I ended up spending a considerable amount of my time at Vanguard and at Uptown. But at any rate, to continue with the story, I interviewed with every single publisher at Times Mirror magazines. On Ski Magazine, Popular Science, Outdoor Life, you name it, I interviewed with them. And none of them wanted me. And
oh, geez.
What ended up happening is the New York sales manager there, a guy named Jeff Nannis, took a liking to me and convinced the publisher, John Crawley, that it was time to bring in someone with my background and with my perspective on life. And so I got hired 6 months later at Outdoor Life, a magazine devoted to people that hunt, fish, and camp. A far journey from where I ended up working the travel sector all over the world. I did very well there, even though, as I found out in the first couple of months, there was a pool in the company, a betting pool as to how long the new black guy would last.
Get out.
Needless to say, a lot of people lost a lot of money.
You beat the odds once again, Henry.
I beat the odds. So that was how my journey started in terms of my first ad sales position for a national publication.
Okay.
And then it went from there. Now, if you'd like to hear how I ended up moving over to the travel sector, happy to tell you that story as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's great to know that you were able to. Well, first off, you broke some barriers over that Times Mirror, and I think that took a lot of grit on your part and patience in order to get them to slowly turn that ship. No pun intended. For them to kind of see where your vision and where your growth perspective was going to land and how it was going to help them flourish. After you flourished at that position, so now clearly you're a successful, magazine ad director. So with that foundation in publishing, how did that shape your approach into travel? And how were you able to successfully marry both of those interests into your lifestyle and your business?
Well, if I'm being entirely honest, the first 3 or 4 years of my ad sales career, I was not working the travel sector. I got promoted from Outdoor Life magazine to become New York sales manager at Popular Science at the same company at Times Mirror. And then I went across the street to Connors Publishing, which at the time was the biggest publisher of trade magazines in the country. But their consumer division had a cash cow by the name of Modern Bride. This is at a time when women would regularly rely on the 3 major bridal books when they were planning their weddings and honeymoons. And so I started there, not on Modern Bride, but on a parenting magazine called Healthy Kids, working with one of the most brilliant publishers the world's ever seen, Joel Ehrlich. Herb Schnall, who got me in at Times Mirror, and Joel Ehrlich, and as you're going to later hear, a guy named Len Burnett, were the key developers in my career in terms of mentorship. Joel hired me to work on Healthy Kids, as I said, a parenting magazine. Well, a lot of times things that happen, Lauren, are just happenstance, luck. He was promoted to become publisher of Modern Bride a couple years later. I'd done a great job at Healthy Kids. And so one day he came to me and he said, "Look, I have news. I'm going to be publisher on Modern Bride, and you're coming with me." And
Wow.
I said, "Well, what do you mean I'm coming with? What am I going to do?" He goes, "Well, there's a guy named Jerry Brennan who runs the office in Miami, and he's retiring, and I want you to go replace him." I go, "Well, like, what am I going to do? Like, I don't know, brides? Like, what is it?" "No, no, 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 nothing to do with that." Because a big part of the business is all the honeymoon business. We're going to relocate you to Florida, and you're going to cover the Caribbean and South America and Central America. And I said, "Well, what does that mean?" "Well, you'll call on hotels, you'll call on tourist boards, you'll compete with the two other big bridal books and make sure we get our share of the business." And
Oh, okay. I see where this is going. Go ahead.
that's exactly what happened. It was Joel Ehrlich who set me on this path. It was Joel Ehrlich who believed in me. It was Joel Ehrlich who opened the door and gave me that opportunity. And so I did move to Florida, and I proceeded to completely devastate those other publications in terms of market share. I developed great relationships with a number of tourism directors and ministers of tourism and hoteliers along the way. And when I took over that territory, if I recall the numbers correctly, we had about an 18% share of market. By the time I left, it was approaching 60%. So I think I did my job. And yeah, I got paid to go from Barbados to Jamaica to Puerto Rico to a conference in Berlin and then back to San Juan and off to the USVI and BVI. And it was a wonderful time in my career. And that was really how everything started. I did a great job in a parenting magazine and got promoted into this position at Modern Bride covering the Caribbean, and the rest is history.
Wow, that is an unbelievable story. I guess it goes all the way back to what folks say. There's no real such thing as luck. It's proper planning and the timing. And if you stay prepared, you'll always be ready.
Yeah, success, as they say, is where preparation meets opportunity, right? So I did the job, the opportunity presented itself, and yeah, I had the chance to go out and do some exciting things in the Caribbean.
Fantastic. I love that. I've always wanted to do a lot more travel in the Caribbean. And of course, we'll get there in a few. But as far as destinations are concerned, which places are you most passionate about and why?
You mean in terms of countries that I visited over the years?
Absolutely. I mean, you visited dozens of countries. Are there any particular ones that stood out?
So the interesting thing about that is, yes, I've been to 90 countries, and what I can tell you is, while there are a number of them that stand out, the one that comes to mind immediately, mainly because I was just there a few weeks ago, is Japan. Japan is a unique cultural experience, and here's what I mean by that. They have, by far, as has often been reported, the best transportation infrastructure in the world. High-speed bullet trains that travel 225 miles an hour. It's amazing. They also have one of the best culinary scenes I've ever seen or experienced. Tokyo, a city of 38 million, roughly the same population as the state of California, has
Hmm.
more Michelin star restaurants than any other city in the world. And that devotion to culinary excellence trickles down from those restaurants right down to the street vendors. The best gyoza I ever had in my life, $2 in Osaka, incredible. So, Tokyo and Japan overall are amazing. And then I'll tell you, as trite as it may sound, the other thing that's so wonderful about Japan is the hospitality of the folks. We had just my wife and I just had many stories about kind gestures from people. Too many to get into, but I will simply tell you that Japan is special. I love Croatia. I have a deep and abiding affection for South Africa. I want to go back there soon. And
Wow.
Japan aside, the food doesn't get much better than tapas in Barcelona. Those are some of my favorite places that I've been.
Hmm.
But what I will tell you, Lauren, is there's a lot more places that I have not been that I'm looking forward to visiting.
That is fantastic. It's astounding to know that you've been to 90 countries, and I'm still talking to folks that have never been out of Queens, New York. It's
Well, tell them to get going. Time to get moving.
absolutely, absolutely. Now, when you do go on these destinations, are there certain things that you're looking for, or is it maybe just a healthy mix of beauty, culture? Are you going for personal transformation? Are you going for business, or is it a healthy mix of all of those?
Well, I'll address that by bifurcating my answer. Of course, many of these countries I visited on business trips.
Okay.
And so that's a distinctly linear experience. You're off the plane, check into the hotel. If you even do that, perhaps head first to a meeting or two. And then, it's back to the hotel and you're working on all that's happening back in New York, particularly when I was running sales teams.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a pretty, straightforward experience. There might be some free time to explore, but not much.
Okay.
On my team trips, to answer your question, what I'm always looking for, maybe not always, sometimes I'm just looking to relax, but most of the time, what I'm looking for is to really immerse myself in the culture. And what do I mean by that? Open myself up to the idea of trying new things, new foods, visiting new places, new activities, and just meeting new people. And what I can tell you is, with a few exceptions, it's always been good. People are just basically good. Yeah, there's some bad folks out there, and I certainly have had a few bad experiences, but for the most part, it's been an enriching experience, running around the world, meeting different kinds of people.
Mm-hmm.
I live for it.
It seems like the world has become a much smaller place to you.
Well, it has, but to be clear, technology's played a big role in that. Think about it. You can grab your phone and plan a trip to the Maldives as quickly as you can plan a trip to the Bahamas. No
Mm-hmm.
difference, right? You have at your fingertips a wealth of information that's made all of us, to some degree, experts, right? At least in our own mind. So, to me, it doesn't matter whether I am in the world. I operate the same way, right? It's
Right.
one big global community. That's the way I see it, and technology has enabled all of us to do that much easier.
Okay, and I'm glad that you mentioned that, especially the technology part. That leads it's perfect transition into my next question. So how has the travel media industry evolved? In the last decade or so, and where do you see it heading next?
Yeah, where do I begin? Well, looking at that through the prism of my own career, at one time in history, print was the dominant medium.
Right.
And so that was the way that most travel marketers reached out to the world, along with maybe radio and to some degree television. And now, of course, digital media has completely transformed that industry to not only in terms of planning travel, but in terms of delivering content. So the industry has just changed in a number of ways, and that it's investing huge sums of money on the digital platform side, particularly in terms of search. And then, above and beyond that, everyone's looking for content that feels organic, what we call native media, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those ads that look more like editorial than the old banner ads, et cetera. I do a lot of that for my client Travel Curator in the form of newsletters. So that it's changed in that regard. I also think that, as you pointed out earlier so well, the world has gotten a lot smaller as a result of people availing themselves of this technology, and marketers know that. And what I mean by that in terms of changing the competitive landscape. Imagine you were a travel tourism director in an island in the Caribbean 20 years ago. You're pretty much focused on competing with islands around you. Bahamas,
Right. Right.
Jamaica, British Virgin Islands, competing with St. Martin, and so forth. Now they recognize they're competing with the world because I can get to Santorini and plan for that trip just as easily as I can get to Bermuda. So it's become much more globalized and much more sophisticated and much more competitive and much more demanding.
Okay. Okay. So And I want to pivot this to the folks that are out there listening and hearing your success stories on how you were really breaking ground and breaking barriers in not only media but in travel. So for young professionals, for those that are kind of looking to break into this business, what would be your best advice? How should folks go about navigating into the spaces that you have so excellently conquered, if you will?
Well, listen, I first of all, let me say this. If you're talking specifically about the travel sector, it's understandable why so many people are attracted to it, right? You know, the glory of running around the world and experiencing all these places. But, you know, the reality is, at the end of the day, you've got to do business. And
Mm,
so, you know, I think for anybody who really wants to travel that journey, they've got to be focused. And by that, I mean you've got to be singularly, narrow-mindedly focused on learning the business, researching it exhaustively so that you become someone who operates in an advisory capacity, you know, with clients. And then the thing that's often said, and I think applies here, passion.
mm.
You can be very good at something, but if you're not really passionate about it, you're not going to be able to overcome the bumps and hurdles along the way. So for me, it's always been stay focused and come at it with a deep passion. I don't work the travel sector because it's glamorous, and yes, it can be at times.
Hmm.
I do. I wake up in the mornings, and the first thing I'm thinking about is where am I going next? And I'm always researching, plotting, not necessarily in the context of any assignment, for my own personal edification.
Right, right.
I love it. I live for it. I can't imagine a world where I didn't wake up and find myself on an airplane headed off to some far-flung corner of the world. So it's been said repeatedly. It may sound somewhat trite, but I think it applies. Do what you're passionate about and focus on it until you get the goal accomplished.
I love it. I love it. Let's talk about legacy and leadership now. Now, this is the time where you have to be kind now, right? You were once my boss and my mentor, right? So we're getting a
Yeah,
little
yeah.
personal here. I love it to, when we can kind of flip it and get a little personal here. But what do you remember most about that time?
Yeah, it's a great question, and you and I worked side by side in that effort. Particularly in the days at Uptown, and those were heady times. You know, here we were, a small black-owned media company trying to make our way in a giant media world that sometimes wasn't as welcoming as we wanted it to be. Trying to tell the story about the value of the African American consumer and why they deserved attention and fair share of dollar. And to be sure, while things are far better than they were, perhaps in the days when John Johnson started Negro Digest, that later became Ebony magazine,
Mm-hmm.
the challenges were nevertheless still there. And they were further compounded by the fact that you and I, Lauren, were there at a time when print was beginning to take a back seat to digital.
Right.
And everybody was trying to figure out how do we embrace this new format? Do we create our own digital version of the magazine? Do we just create a website? What do we do, and how does it work? And all these kinds of things. And we found ourselves often selling it as added value as opposed to leading with it. That's changed now to a large extent. But I think the thing that I remember most and that I embraced the most is that everybody in our family-like atmosphere was very, I go back to that word, passionate
Yes.
about the goal and the mission. And you know that. I mean,
Absolutely.
we had days when it was difficult, and certainly I, as publisher, had many days when I was fighting to get to a revenue number and struggling to make it happen, and so that creates its own level of stress. But one thing was crystal clear. Everybody really believed in what we were doing. It wasn't just a job. We were all understood our role in the annals of history in terms of what we were trying to get done. And maybe it didn't end quite the way that we hoped to, but I'd like to think that the Robin Gibsons of the world, and certainly the guy that led the way, Lynn Burnett, walked away, significantly better and stronger for the experience.
So, what do you hope your legacy in travel and media will be one day?
My legacy. Am I dying, Lauren? What's going on? Am I?
Got
Um, well, listen, I think in terms of how I'd like to be remembered when that day comes, I'm hoping it's inextricably tied to the relationships I've built, both on the client side as well as on the colleague side, and that people feel that, I genuinely cared about them and their business. It won't be the multi-million-dollar deals that I did or those kinds of touchstones. It's hopefully something more visceral than that, a feeling that people have when I walked into the room and when I left the room, and hopefully that feeling was good because that's what I value most, the relationships.
I didn't want it to come off like you're going anywhere, but anyhow.
Yeah, no. I appreciate that sentiment, and you'll forgive me for breaking form, but you had so many good things you wanted to talk about, and I don't know where we are sitting in terms of time, but there was one thing that I just wanted to get to, if it's okay, and it had to do with this question of, is travel a privilege or right or something else
Yes,
entirely? In this modern world, I'd like to speak to that, if that's okay.
absolutely.
I think that while everyone should have the right to traverse the earth, this idea of going out and connecting with people and having these new experiences, it's a privilege. But it's a privilege that everyone should feel they have the right to,
Mm,
right? So in this modern world, there are any number of ways to put yourself in that position. I talked earlier about just how prevalent technology is in terms of helping us, research and plan these trips. There is, in my estimation, virtually no excuse for anyone of even moderate means to not make an effort to get out and experience this world. Not so much that you can sip a daiquiri on the beach. That's fine. Nothing wrong with that. I've done that a number of times.
hmm
But it's about those stories you come home with after, forging friendships, meeting new people, and just, having, as I've said all along, new experiences. It's a privilege, and it's a privilege I think we all should try to pursue one way or the other.
I love it. I love it. It doesn't get any better than that. Now we'll switch gears, and I know we're coming up on that the time mark and everything. So I'll keep it short and sweet. But I would love to touch on your latest venture, right? Watkins Travel Media Group. Can you tell us what that is all about, sir?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I spent the better part of 30 years, as I said, working with tourism boards, from Dubai to Detroit, right? Well, Detroit was really more about the automotive big three, but you get the idea. I've
Absolutely.
traveled all over the world in pursuit of, working with any number of travel partners. And what I realized is, as my career was entering a new phase, I formed all these relationships, right? And people would often come to me, and by people, I mean people in power. A Gaston Brown is the premier of Antigua and Barbuda. Adam Stewart, the CEO of Sandals. Dean Fenton, the director of tourism for Antigua, who I'm seeing at his 70th themed party this weekend. And the conversations would evolve from just a service discussion about advertising to questions that put me in an advisory role. And then I realized that I had a wealth of information and knowledge about how this business works, media and travel,
hmm
that I could leverage on behalf and to the benefit of these clients. So the Watkins Travel Media Group is really a consultancy that's there to build on these personal relationships and advise these people that I care about very deeply on how to address their goals, concerns, objectives, problems that they may encounter along the way. We're seeing some of that now with policies coming out of the Trump administration that are adversely affecting some of our friends in the Caribbean, most notably in Haiti, but also to a lesser degree, the formerly mentioned Antigua Barbuda. as well as a few of the other island nations. And we won't get into the specifics of that, but
Hmm.
I have those high-level discussions that are hopefully valuable. And so the point of distinction for our platform is the ability to leverage, a wealth of information and knowledge and experience and relationships that lead us to hopefully a place where I can help these folks find solutions to key problems.
What we're supposed to get from this is, take your talents, take your passions, blend all of that, and just let God, kind of lead the path to your success.
Yeah, and travel first class when you can. No, I'm kidding. It
Wonderful.
does help on the longer trips, Lauren. Yeah. No, I no. Well said. Well said.
Indeed, indeed. Well, I always like to ask our guests, but this is my signature question as we wrap up and conclude here. If you could leave our listeners with one quote unquote key to unlocking their own journey or their own success, what would it be? Coming from Mr. Watkins.
Don't listen to the doubters. Rest on belief in yourself, and then back it up with a lot of hard work and focus and passion, and you will be unstoppable.
So, is there anything on the horizon, anything coming up that you'd like to promote, or things are kind of top secret right now?
Well, I can tell you that there are a couple of new programs that I'm working on behalf of my major client, Travel Curator. TravelCurator.com is a luxury travel website that provides insight into a lot of fascinating destinations all around the world, as well as some of the top hotels, yachts, etc. Not at liberty to get into details, but check out TravelCurator.com. You'll see it there. And Lauren, I simply want to say it's been a privilege to be a guest on your podcast. Unlocking the world for media and travel is something that is near and dear to my heart. So I thank you for the privilege of being on your platform. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to Mr. Henry Watkins, media and travel connoisseur extraordinaire. Thank you so much for listening and have a great night. God bless, and we are out.
Thank you.